Hello everybody, my name is Michael Johnson and I'd like to invite you in on this Absolute Sound first look at the Metronome AQWO 2 digital all-in-one unit. The AQWO 2, spelled AQWO, is a piece which debuted at Munich High-End 2023, and it is priced in a bit of the high end of its class at $22,000 for the unit. But it does situate itself to be kind of an all-in-one, one-and-done digital front end. It combines a CD SACD transport with a high-resolution DAC, which can do 32 384 kilohertz PCM, and DSD 512, which is also known as 8x DSD. Brand new for the AQWO 2, which is a feature that was not found in the original AQWO, is an integrated streamer which functions over Ethernet and Wi-Fi. The streamer is room ready and also operable with UPnP DNLA, as well as Apple AirPlay. Metronome does have an app of choice that they ask you to use, which is the M-Connect app. I have used that app in previous Metronome products I've reviewed, and I think it functions really well. It is not as high functioning as something like Roon, but for those people that do not want to have a Roon subscription and want a way to integrate streaming on their phone or tablet or something like that, the M-Connect app does do the job. There are two versions of the M-Connect app. There's a free version and a paid version, and I didn't notice a ton of difference between the two. And the AQWO 2 also has full MQA compatibility for those services and media that still offer MQA, which is becoming less and less nowadays. If you are a viewer that does not have Metronome technology on your radar, Metronome is a French manufacturer of high-end audio components. They were founded in 1987. They are also the kind of little brother or sister brand of another well-known audio brand, which is Callista. Callista actually was originally a line in the Metronome technology product lineup. And the current owner and operator of Metronome technology and chief designer, Jean-Marie Clauzel, actually stated that he wanted to spin off Callista into kind of its own high-end brand instead of being formerly the top-end Metronome line. It is now its own kind of unique sister brand. All Metronome products are designed and manufactured in-house at their facilities just outside Toulouse, France. Owner and chief designer Jean-Marie Clauzel has been at the helm of the company since 2013. He is someone who's particularly passionate about disc playback, and you see that in all Metronome and Callista products. One of the exciting things about this review is that this is a company and these are a set of products that are very, very focused around CDs. Even though this has SACD functionality, Metronome has always been a product line that very much believes in CDs as a format for the high end. Now that we understand a little bit about what Metronome are and the philosophy behind their products, let's unpack the features on the AQWO 2. As I said before, the AQWO 2 is a successor to the previous AQWO model, which is simply called AQWO. If you were to compare photos of the two units, you might think that they were highly similar. But Metronome have stated in their press release that the AQWO 2 shares almost no electronic components with the previous model. The chassis features a brushed metal faceplate that's available in a few different colors. This one seems to be kind of a slightly bronzed aluminum finish. And it's supported not by 4 feet, but by 3. It uses a tripod design underneath the chassis. The AQWO 2 is operable by remote control, like the one I have here, but its primary functionality is going to be done through a 6.5-inch LCD touchscreen. This has a 21:9 aspect ratio, and from this touchscreen, we can switch input functions. So right now it is on disk, and we can go to, let's see, USB, SPDIF, AES, Toslink, and back to SACD. Network for streaming. You kind of get the idea. There's also a number of options you can go through to tailor your listening experience, from digital, there's offers some resampling here, to settings on the DAC, settings for digital filter, analog output level, and of course, a little thing here, which is a tube output. I will talk a little bit about that. Here's settings for the streamer, with options for gapless playback here, and firmware. Yes, because this is a digital software product, it does allow for firmware updates. So getting back to what I just mentioned before, the tube buffer option, this is a really interesting option. So this player retails for $22,000, but for $2,300, you have the factory installed option of a tube output stage that can be toggled right here on the touchscreen. This is essentially acting as a tone control along with other digital filter options you have. You can kind of tailor your listening experience. I'm really excited to kind of mess around with this and see, what CDs do I prefer with the tube buffer on, with them off, or if I have any general preference over my listening. Going over the rear of the Metronome AQWO 2, from left to right, we have the power unit with a rocker style on-off power switch, as well as a 3-pronged 15 amp power cord socket. The section for digital inputs contains a XLR connection for AES EBU, a coaxial connection for SPDIF, a optical connection for Toslink, as well as a USB in with a USB-B connection. Right here, there is an Ethernet input for your Ethernet streaming, and I highly recommend, if you're going to be using streaming, in general on any device, I highly recommend going Ethernet over Wi-Fi. Although there is an included antenna Wi-Fi adapter for this unit, which makes it flexible if for some reason you cannot get an Ethernet cord over to your system. And there is also a USB socket, USB-A socket here for dealer service and firmware upgrades and things like that. Now, even though the Metronome AQWO 2 has a very robust DAC in it, if you wanted to simply use this as a transport or as a streamer with another, say you have, your DCS high-end, dream DAC that you've always wanted, but you want to use this as a source, you do have a selection of digital outputs. You have an XLR AES EBU, a coaxial SPDIF output, as well as a HDMI I2S output. I think including I2S is very smart for Metronome, because I think that is by far one of the most important digital connections you can include on a source transporter DAC these days. There are 2 sets of analog outputs on this all-in-one player. 2 left and right channel XLR balanced outputs and 2 RCA unbalanced outputs. CD and SACD playback on the AQWO 2 is going to be a little bit different than if you are used to traditional tray style disc players, such as down here I have my Oboe 105D that I'm very much used to, and that has the handy tray slot that you just put the disc in, close it, and it automatically starts playing. Well, like all things, when you go up in complication, go up in performance, you tend to go more manual. This is true for everything from race cars to coffee, and it's definitely true for disc players. So the Metronome AQWO 2 has a top-loading CD slot. We just slide it open here, and it sees that it's open, and it comes with this magnetic center stabilizing weight. And so you just pop in your disc of choice. This one right here is the AP reissue of Beach Boys' Summer Days. Place it here, and you put the magnetic stabilizer on top and close the lid. And it should start loading from there. So you can press play here on the touchscreen. So I am very excited to jump into my formal review of the Metronome AQWO 2. Not only because I'm very familiar with Metronome's product line, I have reviewed things from the digital sharing line of their products and the classical line of their products, but this is the first thing I've ever been able to review from the AQWO series. $22,000 is a lot of money for any audio product. It's significant to point out that this has the potential to be someone's only digital product. This is the potential to, sit next to all the other analog products on a listener's rack and just be their one-stop digital one and done. And so I want to see how it functions as that. I want to see if all of the different features on this unit are up to the same quality. And I also want to experience using it as a luxury product, because let's face it, this is a luxury product. It is a, made in France, made at one factory, high-end digital player. And because of that, consumers are going to be wanting a certain level of not only fit and finish in the product, but also ease of use. And so my review is going to take all of that as best I can into account, because this really is meant to be the Cadillac of digital players. All right, everyone, we are back. I am back after a long period of listening to a ton of music with the Metronome AQWO 2. This is a very interesting player, and I have a lot of notes. So I tried to listen to pretty much every feature that this player has, and I definitely have some overall feelings about the use and the sound quality of it. But first, I want to kind of touch on how my listening journey went and what I listened to on this unit. I always enjoy reviewing disc players because I actually have a very large CD and SACD collection that oftentimes does not always get a lot of use in my system, because I do tend to gravitate towards vinyl records a lot of the time. But whenever I get to a chance to review a unit like this, it's really exciting because I rediscover some of the music that I fell in love with years ago. Because this is not only a DAC, but an SACD player, CD player, and streamer. I started with a long list of SACDs because I really do think that format is underappreciated. And if you are a physical music collector interested in digital, I think SACD is often the way to go. The first thing I listened to on the Metronome AQWO 2 was a recording, kind of a lesser known recording of a piece that I'm very familiar with. It is the Verdi Requiem, and this is Claudio Abbado with the La Scala Opera Orchestra on Deutsche Grammophon. This is a Esoteric, which is a Japanese high-end digital company, Esoteric SACD reissue. Oftentimes I find in the digital realm, some of these Esoteric reissues are the definitive remasterings and reissues of some of these recordings. And while I wasn't super familiar with this recording, and it's not a perfect recording by any means, just in how it's engineered, there was a lot to like in what I was hearing. The metronome provided a great sense of hall sound and hall detail. Right away, soundstage was incredibly open, and I was getting a lot of ambiance of the stage around the players and the hall that the players were in. And that's a really difficult thing to do with a piece like the Verdi Requiem, because this is a piece scored for full orchestra and double choir and soloists. And so when you're recording a piece like that, you have so many factors to consider. You have such a large ensemble of musicians. You have solo voices you have to worry about. You have a huge choir. And you have oftentimes a huge space you have to be in to perform a piece like that. So it's a really difficult thing to navigate from an engineering standpoint. And so anytime you can get a really good perspective of the hall on a recording like that, I think you're rendering something special, and this definitely did that. And this is not a particularly impactful recording. Like this isn't one of those recordings of the Verdi Requiem where the bass drum hits really hit. But what this player does bring out in this recording is a lot of low bass detail, a lot of low bass tone and color and flesh. And you hear that when the basses and the cellos take over the line, or when there's this kind of these low piano notes in the choir. That comes through very, very clearly. And that's something I tend to notice when you get to components that are in the upper high end like this is. This is a $22,000 piece of equipment. It is, roughly half the cost of my entire system. So it is a very, to use the term, it's a very esoteric piece of equipment. But what I find when I get a chance to hear pieces like this, especially in the digital realm, is that you really do hear a lot more information in the low end. And I don't mean a more powerful low end. There's plenty of pieces of gear that have this kind of artificially pumped up low end. But what you hear in something like this that I've noticed, and I've noticed this in a couple different metronome products I've reviewed, is a very natural low extension, like a real actual low bass that you often don't hear with lower priced equipment. And that's coming through great on this. You hear all the resonance from those low bass pizzicato, the double bass pizzicato, and the bowed strings that kind of sing in the hall. You're not just hearing the sound of the double bass, but you're hearing the sound of the double bass interact with the space around it. And that's something that is kind of a checklist item for me when I'm reviewing higher end pieces of gear. The next SACD I listened to was the Mobile Fidelity original master recording reissue of From Elvis in Memphis. This is kind of a well-known, famous recording, but it's not one that I listen to often. But there is a lot to use in this recording for picking out, how this player, like what kind of sonic signature this player has, and how this player renders vocals is very, very interesting. There's a lot of air around the voice. There's a lot of upper end detail that's very smooth. This is not a harsh player by any means, and it's definitely not one of those players or one of those DACs that picks out upper frequencies. There's a lot of upper extension here, and you hear it in all the subtle overtones of Elvis's voice and kind of the twang of the guitars, but you're not, it's not shouting that information at you, which I really like, because some digital products definitely want to show you everything right away, want to shove something in your face, which is great for the first 5 minutes. It gets very, very fatiguing after a while. I don't think this is a player that you're going to have to worry about getting overly fatigued with it. It's definitely a long listening type of sonic signature, but it does have a really nice air in the upper frequencies. One of the standout tracks on this for me was track 3, I'll Hold You in My Heart. And I just remember writing and underlining in my notes, awesome drum sound. A lot of these recordings from the 60s and 70s have a very flat drum sound, which is very impactful, but there's oftentimes not a lot of air around those drum hits. There's oftentimes not a lot of resonance in those drum hits. You don't always hear a tone. Sometimes we just hear a kind of an engineered smack. But through this DAC, through this SACD player, I really did hear a lot of space around the drums, and it made the drums sound even more impactful. So I just underlined awesome, awesome drum sound. The cymbals sound really, really good. There's a lot of decay. So the cymbals ring and don't cut off right away. They really decay into the sound of the overall ensemble. And one thing I noted on here is that I could hear the tape splices. They were very, very obvious through this player. So it does have a lot of detail to it, but it's not detailed in a prickly kind of way. It's not detailed in a way that takes you out of the music. But on a recording like this, yes, I can hear what's going on in the studio, and you can kind of hear the studio tricks they're using, even though it's ostensibly a live recording. There's still stuff going on. There's like panning and splices in and out, and you definitely hear it on this player. I also listened to the Alan Parson project, Eye in the Sky, on Mobile Fidelity Super Audio CD, and this is kind of a classic audiophile recordings, digital mastering. One of the standout tracks on this was Silence and I, and I think there's a really nice layering going on in this track, and you really hear it present in the presentation from the metronome. There's a lot of really good transient attacks, a lot of energy, and a lot of really good rhythm and pacing. This player, even though it has somewhat of a rich tonal characteristic, it never felt slow or gooey or stuck in the mud. Things that are driving, sound driving, things that have a groove to them, you hear that groove. And I definitely heard it on this album, because this album definitely has a lot of moments of parts that would sound boring if they don't have that driving feeling, that driving texture. And it was able to do that very, very well. Up until this point, this player had been doing a lot of things very well, but it didn't really show me what its superb strength was. But I think with this next recording, I kind of found it, and that is the esoteric reissue of Shostakovich Symphony No. 5, originally on Decca with Bernard Haitink and the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra. This is a recording actually that I wasn't really attuned to. Maybe it was because it was recorded in that awkward period of Decca where they were doing early digital recordings. But listening to this on the esoteric SACD sounds fantastic. And one thing that this recording has that I had never noticed before was huge breadth of huge dynamic range, both in the macro, in these huge orchestral swells, but also in the micro dynamics. Shostakovich Symphony No. 5 is, I think, one of the greatest symphonies ever composed. And so much of what makes it great is Shostakovich is able to contrast these huge orchestral moments. I mean, that opening fanfare in the fourth movement with the brass is crushing and intense, and it gets your adrenaline going. And there's so many moments like that, but there's also really, really haunting, intimate moments, especially in the third movement that is incredibly creepy almost. And a lot of the music in the third movement relies on solo voices to move the theme along, move Shostakovich's musical ideas along, like the flute solo, like the oboe solo, like various string solo voices. And one thing that really impressed me is, yeah, you hear the big dynamic swings of the orchestra on this recording and through the metronome, but you also are able to hear the microdynamics. The microdynamics come through super well on this player. Like for instance, when a particular solo instrument just has this, the oboe solo in the third movement, just sits on this really just very, very subtle bed of string sound. It's almost like time has stopped, and then the oboe comes in. And on a lot of recordings, or a lot of setups, various times when I've listened to recordings of this piece, you don't really get absolutely all the little dynamic and color changes the soloist is making there, because the soloist has a huge amount of room here, but it's just one instrument on an empty, like on a stage where there's almost no sound except for a small string held note. But you're able to hear, through this presentation, I was able to hear all the different microdynamics, all the different phrasing choices the soloist was able to do in that little section, and it was chilling. And it really comes across. And another thing that also comes across well when listening to this recording through this player is, if you've ever heard a live symphony orchestra in a real space, the sound of instruments is different when everyone is playing versus when very few are playing. When you hear, let's say, a flute solo over an accompaniment of an orchestra that is not, super hushed, it's a normal orchestral accompaniment with the flute solo, you hear the flute with a certain color and a certain texture in the hall on top of that orchestra. And it's a little drier because you're not hearing all the little subtle interactions of the hall around the flute. But if there's almost no sound coming from the orchestra and you hear that same flute, you hear it with a very different tone color, a very different texture, and you hear the interaction of the flute. You realize it's this small instrument in this big, big, big space, and it behaves like that. You hear all the little echoes throughout the hall. And that comes through on this player, and it's not something I'm used to hearing in the digital domain. It's kind of freaky because it's something I'm used to hearing sitting in the audience or sitting in rehearsal. That's something I hear. Like when I'm the first person to rehearsal and I show up and no one else is playing on stage and I play a couple warm-up notes in the hall, it's like, wow, you hear the sound go off into that space. And you don't hear that when you're just playing with the orchestra normally. And that's something I was very surprised. And it's probably a combination of how good Esoteric's remastering is and how well the disc playback here renders it. So this was really where I started to hear what this player was capable of.
Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, readers will submit questions. We'll pick the most interesting ones and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks. And now back to the show.
The last SACD that I played was Miles Davis Kind of Blue, just because it's a recording I know really well and most people know really well. This is the Japanese Sony SACD, and this is a really good recording mostly for being able to see how well something does with soundstage. And, the metronome did very well. I wouldn't say this player has the widest soundstage of any digital thing I've ever heard, but what it does have is a lot of depth and space around the instrument. So the imaging is very, very good. The depth of the soundstage is very, very good. It really feels like there's some space, not only in terms of distance of the players, but there's some space in terms of room for the instrument to kind of interact with the space around it before the next instrument comes into field, if that makes any sense. But this is definitely like a checklist recording for me, and the metronome definitely passed. One of my favorite live recordings of all time. Now we're getting into the CDs, and so we're getting into 1644 kind of brick-walled audio quality. But you'd be surprised what a good CD player can do. This is Morrissey's Beethoven Was Deaf, one of my favorite live recordings of all time, and I think Morrissey's best album. This is not a audiophile album, I don't think, but I think this was a really enjoyable listening session through the metronome. Really, really great soundstage for a live recording, a lot of image, decent image depth for what it is, which is a kind of crude live recording. There's a natural amount of sibilance in this recording, mostly from Morrissey when he's on the microphone, especially in the track 2, Certain People I Know. It never gets to the kind of grating point. You're going to have sibilance on any system, any piece of equipment you play this recording on, but it was never an intrusive part of my listening to the Metronome AQWO 2. It just sounded like I was at a live performance and I was hearing someone S too much into the microphone, which is what Morrissey was doing. Dynamic swings were very, very good, and I'm not sure how much of that is the engineering, but it came across beautifully on the AQWO 2. National Front Disco. There's a lot of chaotic instrumentals in this, especially at the end, and you get kind of one of those explosive, like Pink Floyd The Wall moments at the end of this, where the guitarists are just kind of playing directly into their amps, tons of feedback, tons of noise. And that felt really, really big and huge on the Metronome AQWO 2. It was like I was at a live concert, and you're getting that distortion right in your chest. It was very good. And of course, the best song on this album, bar none, and my favorite Morrissey song is Jack the Ripper. And the version on this is my favorite version. You can clearly hear all the little bits and parts that all the musicians are putting into this very subtle and very menacing and very creepy song. All the little guitar flourishes, all the little backing vocals. No, sorry, not backing vocals. The backing percussion. Like I heard the tambourine clearly in this recording that I've never noticed before. And of course, the rendering of Morrissey's vocals you're able to get this very, very sweet but also unnerving quality to it. If it just sounds like normal Morrissey singing in his sweet croon, that you're not rendering the recording as best as it can be, because when you have a really great rendering of this recording, you're able to hear the contrast between the soothing qualities that he's putting out and the menacing undertones of this song and how he's singing it. Comes across awesome on here. Another CD I listened to was Cozy by the Japanese artist, multi-instrumentalist Tatsuro Yamashita. And this is one of his 90s recordings, kind of a recording that was kind of a surprise because it was past his 80s parade of hit albums. But this is a very underrated album that's finally getting the attention it deserves, because it's such a ambitious and multifaceted and multi-styled album. There's elements of hip hop, soul funk, of more subtle ambient electronic music on here. There's really a lot of stuff going on this disc. The recording is a little bit bright. It's always been bright, no matter what system I played it on. It sounded a little hard, especially in the opening track when you have the hits with the keyboards and the drums. It's kind of like, you're hitting that seedy brick wall there. But, the metronome doesn't shine a spotlight on it. It lets you know that it's there. This is how the recording sounds, but it's not, it doesn't make it more offensive than it would be naturally. It gets out of the way and shows you what's on the recording, but it doesn't rub your face in it, which I don't like digital products that there's some digital products that really sound amazing with the right recordings, that sound fantastic with the right recordings, and you play something else on there and it's like, well, now I don't want to listen to half my music collection. Not a problem here. I've really enjoyed kind of exploring the depths of my music collection on this player. There are a couple recordings that I love that are, you know, you can tell they're CDs. You can tell they're 90s CDs. Two of the recordings I want to talk about are the Matthew Good Band's Beautiful Midnight, a very, very underrated Canadian 90s alternative rock album, probably their best album, but it is a very hard recording. Some of the big rock crescendos in this are very, very hard. And, you know, it sounded better than when I played it on other systems. It sounded better than through my Denafrips, but it still was not satisfying to listen to. And so this is when I tried experimenting with, see if I can show it on here, experimenting with the tube buffer. And, you know, I'm usually not one for tone controls, but I think this is of all the ways you could implement tone controls on a player, on a DAC or a player or anything like that, I think having a tube buffer on the output stage is a really nice way to do it, because the tube buffer, when listening to this recording, really solved a lot of the problems. Like the bitey quality of the upper guitars was smoothed out. It actually made both the vocals and the drums sound a little more round, a little more juicy with the tube buffer engaged. And, you know, it's something I would have never thought to put on for the orchestral recordings, for the jazz recordings, or even for the well-engineered stuff like the Morrissey album. But, you know, something that's a little more 90s digital Red Book CD, you know, that you're limited both by the bit rate and the technology at the time. It really helped. And it also helps with one of my favorite recordings of, you know, maybe musically one of my favorite albums of all time, and that is Lunacy's debut 1991 album, self-titled album. This is no one is going to know this record I'm holding up, but this is the debut album by the Japanese visual kei band Lunacy. And it is one of the best debut albums of all time. It is a blistering statement in genre-defining masterpiece, I think. It's so energetic. It's a young band. They're just developing their style, and their style is so unique because what they were able to do is they were able to take the kind of wistful melodies and guitar stylings of, you know, British bands in both the goth and the neo-romantic and the new wave genres. So, you know, stuff like The Cure, stuff like, you know, some of those neo-romantic artists with the beautiful flowing melodies. They were able to take that and pair it with a thrash sound that almost reminds you of like Megadeth or Metallica in the drums, like thrash style drums, super, super quick tempos, just banging the hell out of their instruments. You combine all that, you get these beautiful melodies with this insane, intense energy, and it's a very engaging listen. But this was their debut album before they were signed to MCA, a major label. This was originally on Ecstasy Records, and it is almost unlistenable on anything. It's really, really bright, really chill. There's no anything like mid-range and below is just rolled off. It's just tinny and bright, and it sounds like you're recording it on an iPhone a room away from people banging on pots and pans in a kitchen. It's really, really bright. I mean, Shinny the drummer is just hitting the shit out of his cheap drum set, and it sounds like it on the recording. The original CD, 1991 CD, doesn't sound good. This is a 2007 remastering that was done by Ted Jensen at Sterling Sound, and it helps a little, but the problem is in the engineering of the recording. And I gotta say, even on the Metronome AQWO, it was pretty not listenable. But with the tube buffer engaged, this thing right here, it definitely, it was, you know, the first track was a little rough, and then I was able to kind of sink into the recording, and it was the most unfatiguing high volume listening of this recording I've ever done. And there's a lot to admire. This is one of those albums that starts at like 100 miles an hour and just keeps going. Probably my favorite track on the album is track 5, Shade. And, you know, it has these relentless, quick thrash drums and these really, really chintzy high guitar chords. And they're using like really cheap, like ESP 90s Japan guitars and not great amplifiers. And they're really, you know, playing all these high guitar parts, high chords, you know, back and forth, trading off over these really, really banging drums. It's hard to make that sound like a full fleshed out balanced sound. It really is tough to do that, but I really appreciated having the tube buffer here for that. So the tube buffer, as I said in the beginning part of this video, the tube buffer is an expensive option. It's a $2,300 option add-on you can get on this player. And if most of your recording library is, you know, very classic, well done acoustic recordings, you're not going to need the tube buffer. But if you're like me and you have eclectic taste and you want to be able to listen to everything and enjoy everything, this is not a bad option. And if I were ordering this player, I would definitely get the tube buffer. I think it, for recordings like this, makes a big difference. So I just held up a bunch of CDs and SACDs that I listened to for this, but this is also a streamer, and that's what's new about the AQWO 2. Besides the, you know, supposed redesign, you know, I wasn't gonna open this case like I've opened some products before because it has a disc tray in it. I'm not gonna do that. But you know, according to Metronome, this is a complete redesign from the previous AQWO. But one of the biggest changes is the addition of the streamer. I did listen to the streamer. I mean, as you can see here, I've got the streamer up right now through Qobuz and the mConnect app. So, as I said in the earlier part of this video, there's a lot of different ways you can stream to this. It has an Ethernet port on the back, and that's the recommended way I would recommend setting up your streaming. But it also has a Wi-Fi antenna. So if you can't get an Ethernet cable to this unit, you can use the Wi-Fi antenna and it will work. You have a number of options for how you're going to stream to this player. It is compatible with Apple AirPlay, and Metronome traditionally has always used a very much a proprietary implementation of AirPlay. It's not just your standard off-the-shelf implementation. I remember reviewing the Metronome DSS streamer for a previous publication, and that had very, very, very good AirPlay sound, and this is no different. You know, I'm used to doing AirPlay to the streamer in my Hegel H390. This is definitely an improvement over that. Even using the DAC loop out, I compared it, you know, going into the streamer on the Hegel and then going to the DAC on the Metronome, and the streamer on the Metronome does sound better, fuller, more fleshed out by comparison. The better ways to do it are to do UPnP DNLA, which you will use the Metronome recommended app, which is the mConnect app, which I have up here on my phone. That is a player. It's in an app store. You can download either the paid or the free version. And it makes it very easy if you use Tidal or Qobuz, or if you have a music server somewhere, you can integrate that into the mConnect app and just play from the app. It will access your Qobuz, it will access your Tidal and play to the player. And that way you can get full high res, because with AirPlay, you're limited, I think AirPlay limits to, does it still limit to 1644? It might be higher than that by now, but there is a limit to AirPlay bitrate, but not so if you're going over UPnP DNLA. You can do full, full PCM 9624, 192.24. And obviously, if you are a streaming aficionado, you probably have Roon or maybe Ottervana, but Roon is the one it seems most people use nowadays. And I've used Roon in the past, and I got a new trial again just to test the functionality on this player. It's a perfect Roon endpoint. The functionality is very easy. If you've ever used a Roon ready device, it works exactly the same way. And it probably is, if you're going to be streaming, doing Roon with Qobuz and in a library of digital music on a hard drive is probably the best way to go about it. You're going to get your best sound quality. The difference on this player between Qobuz and Apple AirPlay with Apple Music is noticeable, and I did notice it. I mean, AirPlay and Apple Music sounds good, but it does sound thinner. But the big surprise was, and I guess it's not a surprise because I've had this hunch for a while, is that the disc playback on this unit is so good that you actually will find yourself wanting to gravitate towards disc playback if you are a CD or SACD collector. Playing back a CD quality resolution stream on either Qobuz or Apple Music to the Metronome AQWO 2, I did notice a difference doing that and playing, like right here I have the 1644 stream of Matthew Goodband playing here, or paused here, and I have the CD. And I did notice a difference that the CD sounded better. And that's not something I'm unfamiliar with, this concept of physical discs providing something that the streaming lacks. Now, the more difficult question is, do you go a high-res stream, or do you go a 1644 CD? That's a more difficult question that I don't know if I can answer. But I can answer the fact that Metronome have always focused on their disc playback. It's been the highlight of the company. It's been the thing they really excel at. And so I think, this is a player primarily for people that are into playing physical discs. The streamer in this is great. And, if you have a disc collection and stream, I think this player makes a lot of sense, even at the price. But what you have to remember is that this player has everything in one box, essentially. It is a streamer that works with pretty much every streaming protocol you might want to use, every program you might want to use, even Tidal, MQA, or anything that still uses MQA. This will do that. It is a CD and SACD player, something that is not super common. It is a high-resolution DAC going up to the highest rates in both DSD and PCM. And it really can be your one-and-done digital unit. So it is expensive. $22,000 is very expensive. But when you start piecing it out, if you are someone with a high-end system of, say, the average cost of your components is, let's say you're one of those people that has, an amplifier between $8,000 and $10,000 and a preamp in that same kind of range, you start piecing out the components in this unit, you're getting into that same range. So, it's like, do you want to spend a larger chunk of money on one unit, or do you want to tinker more? If you're someone that wants to go through 15 different DACs over the next 20 years, that's just what you enjoy doing, you like tweaking constantly, this is probably not the player for you. But if you're really searching for something that can accomplish everything, and you want to be able to play your compact discs and your SACDs and have it integrated with a really, really high-end DAC that is more or less future-proof, I think this should be a contender for you. I mean, this is really, I think, a contender for an end game, just do it all, simple digital unit. Now I get into kind of the philosophical thoughts on this player. And that is, I think it's great. I think this is a very organic sounding player. I think the DAC in it is really good. I have reviewed Metronome DACs, and I've had experience with Metronome DACs in the past with the Classica range. And I thought the sound, the Classica DAC, which is the DAC, just simply called the DAC, I thought that was a very good DAC, but it was a little too liquid and warm for my taste in my system. I think that characteristic here is not as present. I think this is a much more neutral player. I think it has a little hint of warmth. It will never shout at you, but it renders a much, much cleaner, clearer, more all-encompassing picture, I think, than the DAC in the Classica range. And I don't know how much of that is simply Metronome redesigning their technology for the next generation, or if it's exclusive to the AQWO range. But I was very impressed by the DAC in this and the overall tonal characteristic. It really suited my ears. So if you like a more analog sounding DAC that doesn't sacrifice clarity, that has really good top-end resolution, that doesn't shout at you, this is really something that I think you're going to like. I think fans of analog sound, fans of vinyl records are really going to like this digital player. So who is the target audience for this? I think people that have big physical disc collections is a good target demographic for this player, because the disc playback on this is by far the most impressive thing I heard in this player. The DAC is nice, the streamer is nice, the disc playback is next level. I think it's the best thing on this unit, and it's what Metronome are good at. It's what they do, it's what their focus is, it's what their passion is, and it comes across in this presentation. I think this is also a great digital solution for someone who has a very high-end system that is vinyl focused. Like, let's say you put a ton of money into various different analog components, like you got your separate phono preamp, power supply, high-end turntable. It takes up a lot of rack space. and you want to have a high level digital experience, but you don't want to go full like separate player, streamer, DAC, a bunch of different boxes, and having a very intricate digital setup like that, and you want a one and done box solution. Yeah, absolutely. I think the AQWO 2 is the perfect player for you. If you want to tinker endlessly and and constantly changing your digital sound signature with different DACs, different players, different streamers, and have really that multi-box level of control that some people want, you may want to look at different products in the Metronome range or different digital products. I mean, the AQWO range does have an SACD transport, a CD transport, a standalone DAC. There are standalone units in this range that I would recommend looking at, but I think the AQWO 2 integrated unit is definitely one of those one and done boxes, and some people are going to like that and some people aren't. Personally, I love this thing, and I am a more analog focused listener. I do have a large record collection, and so having a ton of digital units in my system rack is not always going to be a priority for me. So if I can have a one box solution that is high quality on all fronts, but especially in physical media playback, man, I love this. This is great. As someone that collects SACDs, which I know not everyone does, I think this is fantastic. And if it was in my budget, I would buy this. I definitely would. I could see myself enjoying this for many, many, many years and getting a satisfying listening experience across genres, especially with the tube buffer, the ability to just tweak that sound ever so slightly. If you have a rich, natural recording, it needs no adjustment whatsoever. And if you have something that's a little maybe more primitive or more low budget, using the tube buffer, I like that. I don't normally like tone controls like that, but I did enjoy that feature in the AQWO 2. I really enjoyed my time with the AQWO 2. I've had hands-on experience with a lot of Metronome products, and I've enjoyed some of them, and some of them I was more critical of, but I think this one, they hit it out of the park. The everything from the functionality, the ease of use, the sound quality, the feature set is remarkable. If I was to be super, super fair and list a couple criticisms I have, they're very, very minor. The first is that in Metronome standalone streamers, they have the ability to act as a network player and take a USB drive and use that as part of your streaming apparatus, so you can have a digital hard drive plugged into the streamer. This does not offer that. It is receiving signal only. It does not offer the ability to integrate your network. So you do have to have a separate server. You cannot use this as a music server. That's, I think, if you're trying to make a Swiss Army knife player, that would have been a nice feature to have. So that's my one criticism. The other very minor criticism is I think the remote that they have is not super, it's a very beautiful remote. I think it's high quality, but it is not necessarily tailored to the functionality of the AQWO 2. Sometimes it was a little clunky to use. Sometimes it didn't register. I had to, if you want to control the inputs on the player, you have to select the amp button. You can't do it from the CD button. It like separates into two different functions, kind of like on a universal remote when you go between TV and cable box. It's kind of like that on this. And sometimes it just wasn't super responsive. So maybe having a dedicated remote for the AQWO range would be, if this is a universal remote across Metronome products, maybe tailoring it a little bit more to this specific player. But some stuff we're just happy to have a remote at all. My Denafrips does not have a remote. I have to get up and physically change the inputs on it. So I mean, I'm really, really pulling at threads here, but those are my only minor criticisms. Overall, I think this is a fantastic product, and you should definitely, if this is something that interests you, especially if you're a compact disc or SACD collector, I would recommend going out and trying to listen to this unit. I think it's a fantastic player, and I'm really gonna miss when it's gone. But yeah, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let us know down in the comments, and I will see you next time for another review. Thank you guys for tuning in.